Projekt Guru.
Всем привет! С вами Zak Novak на радиостанции Novorossia Rocks. Welcome to Novorossia Rocks radio station. This is Zak Novak, your American in downtown Donetsk. The program is called Projekt Guru, and Guru is in the house as always. Andre, my engineer, here as well. Let's get to it. The Obama regime defending terrorists rejects Russia's call to bomb al-Nusra front. With al-Qaeda's Nusra front taking over more and more territory in Syria and reportedly preparing to establish an independent emirate that would mirror the government set up by ISIS, Russia today issued a statement calling for joint operations against the Islamists with the United States. But the US and Russia are engaged in airstrikes against ISIS in Syria, and both have at times launched strikes against al-Qaeda forces there as well. US officials, however, didn't respond kindly to the idea of joint operations against al-Qaeda. "We do not collaborate or cooperate with the Russians," insisted Pentagon spokesman Captain Jeff Davis, who added that the US has different military objectives in Syria than the Russians do, and that the US is focused on defeating ISIS. The US and Russia have been conducting bilateral negotiations on a plan to end the Syrian civil war after 5 years, and Russia couched today's proposal as a way to remove a major obstacle to the peace, al-Qaeda's stranglehold on much of the northwest Syria. US officials, however, seem determined to reject any Russian plan out of hand, which likely explains why the months of negotiations have just amounted to intermittent US statements of condemnation. Violent crackdown on protesters in Baghdad, 4 dead and over 100 wounded. Pro-reform protesters who took to the streets of Baghdad on Friday were in mourning over the weekend after bloody crackdowns on the demonstrators who entered the green zone left at least 4 dead and over 100 others wounded. Despite most of the casualties involving being shot with live ammunition, officially the Iraqi government insists only rubber bullets were used. Photos from the site of the crackdown show dozens of bullet casings littered around the area. Indeed, reports from around the area throughout Friday talked of a large number of gunshot wounds among the protesters, and it appears the official denial of live ammunition only came the following day after confirmation that 4 people had been killed. Officials appeared mostly unconcerned about the civilian toll of the crackdown, with Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi and US President Barack Obama both agreeing that most important thing was tighter security in the capital to prevent the protesters getting into the green zone. Iraq has been facing tens and at times hundreds of thousands of protesters weekly, demanding Abadi follow through on promised reforms. There is no sign that any of those reforms will be voted on in Parliament, or indeed any sign that Parliament itself will meet again anytime soon. Let me bring in my lovely co-host Natalia with some more news from around the world and Novorossia.
Military sitrop of Novorossia. Yesterday it was reported that Ukrainian army shelled Donetsk northern suburbs by mortar bombs. The Ukrainian armed formations shelled the village of Spartak and Zhabichevo, located to the north of Donetsk, with mortar bombs last night. The Sakhanka populated locality in the Novoazovsk district of the Donetsk People's Republic also came under Ukrainian mortar shelling. DPR security source told to the Donetsk news agency on Sunday. The Ukrainian side shelled Spartak, Zhabichevo and Sakhanka by 120mm caliber and 82mm caliber mortars. The shelling was carried out since 10:30 and it was lasted in the morning yesterday, the source says. According to the source, Ukrainian fighters launched 15 82mm caliber shells and 6 shells of 120mm caliber bombs. The contact group for the Ukrainian settlement agreed to establish a new silence regime as of midnight on April 30th. At the meeting in Minsk it was on 29th April. But the sides in conflict continued to accuse each other of truce violations. Ukrainian armed forces shelled the village of Donetsk Volva-Center Oktябрьский Spartak. Kiev fighters launched more than 160 mines at suburbs of Donetsk, Sinovate and southern villages of the DPR. It has been reported recently today in the morning by the DPR Defense Ministry. Since 8 p.m. to the midnight, Ukrainian side shelled villages Spartak, Veselый, Oktябрьский and Sakhanka in the south of the DPR. Sinovate checkpoint was also shelled, Volva Center and airport of the DPR, the DPR defense representative reported. It was earlier reported that 70 mines were launched at suburbs of Donetsk, Yasinavate and south of the DPR. It is necessary to point out that dwellers of villages as Yelenovka town, Yasinavate and Donetsk city gathered with a protest at the staff office of the OSCE mission in Donetsk. Again, it was a peaceful rally, however, participants promised to return back in 2 weeks if the situation remains the same, difficult for them. Sport news of Novorossia. Yesterday, Dmitry Khaladze, born in Donetsk, Komsomolsky, cracked a regular world record, one of the strongest men of the world who was registered in the Guinness Book as the author of 63 records, and yesterday he cracked one more world record in the capital of the DPR. On 22nd May, in the center of the Christian culture of Donetsk, Dmitry Khaladze fixed one more record before a large audience. Dwellers and guests of the city greeted the sportsman joyfully.
War between Kurdish YPG and US-backed terrorists, the Free Syrian Army FSA, getting out of control. Throughout the increasingly complex Syrian civil war, one constant has been that any major group armed by the US will sooner or later start fighting the others. This is increasingly the case with the US-backed terrorists, the Free Syrian Army, and the Kurdish YPG increasingly at odds, threatening yet another war within a war. Occasional fighting has already been reported over the past month, with claims that the YPG had killed some 50 FSA members in fighting over the village of Ain Dakna near the Turkish border, and was displaying the bodies of the slain fighters in nearby Afrin. Over the past weekend, a former FSA officer, who the FSA now insists was fired, attacked and killed a pair of Kurdish fighters in what he said was a revenge attack for the village incident. The FSA dismissed it as a false military operation. It reflects a growing amount of distrust between the two sides. However, the Arab-dominated FSA, representing the Sunni Arab majority of Syria, and the Kurds, representing the minority that dominates the nation's northeast, the U.S. has been keen to back both sides and has tried to get the two sides to work out their differences, with the YPG mostly fighting ISIS and the FSA mostly fighting the Assad government. However, they have very different priorities, and the fighting could easily continue to escalate. Afghanistan getting worse. Terrorist organization NATO decides to extend military operation. 2016 is almost halfway over, and the war in Afghanistan is going as bad as ever. Though it is not as high profile a topic of discussion at NATO meetings, 15 years into the failing occupation, the alliance once again agreed to extend the military operation, which was scheduled to end at the end of 2016. This wasn't the first end of the war date, and indeed, to hear NATO talk, the war officially ended a year ago, even if their military involvement didn't significantly change on that date. Rather, the increasingly unpopular war was rebranded as a training mission. No one had any realistic expectations that the 2016 date would be the actual end to the mission, but rather was just the latest in a series of dates set down the road as the alliance continued to not achieve its goals and continued to try to present those goals as coming soon. The US, of course, had no intention of withdrawing at the end of 2016 at any rate, and has already punted their end date to the end of 2017 and later extending it to an indefinite point in the future. The NATO announcement just means that they'll have company from the other nations, at least the ones still willing to throw troops at the war. NATO Fascist Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg also confirmed that the alliance is separately debating a plan to extend the subsidy of Afghanistan's military beyond the present end date of 2020. After 15 years of occupation, terrorist organization NATO has created a huge Afghan military, but the nation has virtually no economy, no tax base, and no chance of paying for it on their own. Most analysts agree this subsidy is going to continue for decades to come. With new Prime Minister in Turkey, full dictatorial power will be given to fascist Erdogan. Just weeks after the expulsion of Ahmet Davutoglu, Turkey has a new prime minister in the form of Binali Yildirim, a former transportation minister and longtime ally of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Needless to say, this greatly improves Erdogan's position, ending his feud with the Prime Minister's office over attempts to expand his own power, with Yildirim saying that his top priority is to expand Erdogan's power at the expense of his new post. Historically, the Turkish Prime Minister holds most of the power in government, with the presidency mostly a figurehead position. Erdogan, however, has been shifting this since becoming president, seeking reforms that will give him near dictatorial power. Davutoglu, a high-profile politician himself, was clearly resistant to losing so much power, but Yildirim seems fully aware that he's in office to do exactly that, and with Erdogan now getting a constitutional amendment allowing him to prosecute his political opponents, it seems nothing stands in his way from adding to his authority. Here we go. Nazi dictatorship in Turkey. Fascist Erdogan. Major offensive against U.S.-backed terrorist ISIS in Fallujah, Iraq has begun, with the full and virtual destruction of the Anbar provincial capital city of Ramadi earlier this year. Fallujah is the major ISIS city that is closest to the Iraqi capital of Baghdad and is the target of a new offensive announced by Iraqi Prime Minister Haider Abadi this weekend. Fallujah is actually the longest held ISIS city in Iraq, falling in January of 2014 when public protests against the Maliki government provided an opening for the ISIS forces to take over parts of the city. Iraqi forces have been surrounding the city in recent months pending this offensive. Iraqi military spokesman Brigadier General Yahya Rasool ordered all civilians to flee the city of some 200,000 people, adding that they are providing corridors to escape through. This call came in spite of weeks of Iraqi officials claiming ISIS wasn't allowing anyone to flee. Neighboring Ramadi, the fate of the larger city must be looming large for Fallujah's residents, as Ramadi was virtually destroyed in weeks of Iraqi military offensive, and civilians by and large still aren't able to return to the rubble nearly 6 months later. A group of Afghan police opened fire and killed 6 other police officers and defect to Taliban. Adding to the number of incidents of Afghan police killing one another, a group of 3 Afghan police opened fire and killed 6 others in the Uruzgan province over the weekend, looting their weapons from the police checkpoint and defecting to the Taliban. Incidents of police and Afghan soldiers killing one another aren't always the result of Taliban infiltration, but the growing number of recent cases appear largely to be, with many examples of planned attacks and lootings of remote police posts. The Taliban insisted in a new statement over the weekend that they have thousands of defectors from the Afghan security forces and offered a general amnesty to any other Afghans who had been helping NATO but wished to change sides. The Taliban often exaggerates figures on defections and the like, but the Afghan military has struggled mightily with desertions, and with a large number of Afghan ghost troops who don't exist to begin with, it's hard to tell how many they are actually losing, let alone where they are going. If Israeli Defense Minister Lieberman is a real man, let him approach Gaza. Hamas scorns Lieberman's threat to kill leaders if Israeli bodies not returned. If Lieberman is a real man, let him approach Gaza, says senior Hamas official Mahmoud al-Zahar in a statement to the press. The expected appointment of Yasser Betanyu leader Avigdor Lieberman as Israel's defense minister has led to the predictable scorn and bravado from Hamas officials in the Gaza Strip. If Lieberman is a real man, let him approach Gaza, said senior Hamas official Zahar in a statement. Al-Zahar was referring to a comment by Lieberman last month that as defense minister he would order the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh within 48 hours if Hamas does not return the bodies of IDF soldiers killed in the 2014 war. If Gaza wants to hunt him, it will hunt him, Al-Zahar said, scorning Lieberman's threat to eliminate the Hamas leadership if the bodies of the IDF soldiers Oron Shaul and Hadar Goldin are not returned. Another Hamas official, Politburo member Fatih Hamad, told a rally in Gaza on Friday that the movement would not be cowed by Lieberman's threats to assassinate the movement's political and military leaders. We do not call for war, but we will fight if it is imposed upon us. Thousands of Gazans burned pictures of high-ranking Israeli officials and demanded an end to the 9-year-old siege of the impoverished territory during the rally, which was held to mark Nakba Day, the 1948 creation of the state state of Israel. Hey folks, that ends our program. As I stress always, be safe, stay on alert, and see you all on Wednesday. Bye-bye, folks.